I chose a chocolate cake for Emily since you love. You like chocolate, don't you? Mom, if you eat that, you'll die. My daughter, Jennifer, quickly swapped my cake with Bob's. I hesitantly took a bite. Jennifer began to eat her cake too. As Bob bragged about how he had reserved this cake a month in advance and how delicious the crushed nuts on top were, he suddenly began to choke. Bob's face turned bright red, he struggled to breathe, started foaming at the mouth, shivered, and then collapsed to the floor. My name is Emily. I'm 36 and work for a food inspection company. I live with my husband, who is 2 years older than me, and our 7-year-old daughter, Jennifer. I met Bob in a college club, and after we both got jobs, we started dating and got married 2 years later. The next year after our marriage, we had our daughter Jennifer. Jennifer was a late bloomer, she started walking when she was 2. We got her checked out at various hospitals, but they found no abnormalities. Every hospital said that it was just individual differences and suggested waiting to see how she progresses. At first, Bob was extremely worried. However, he became frustrated with Jennifer's delays in speaking and walking and began to ignore her. My mother-in-law, Diane, always disliked Jennifer, assuming she had a disability, and never held her. Only my father-in-law was affectionate to her, often telling me with a smile how unique and wonderful she was. It made me really happy. Bob had been very kind until we got married, but with Jennifer's issues, he was always grumpy at home. If something didn't go his way, he would slam the table or stomp loudly on the floor, always making a loud noise. Every time he did that, I'd get scared and shrink back. Bob's behavior stressed me out, causing hormonal imbalances, leading to menopause, and I couldn't have any more children. I remember sobbing with my head buried in the pillow. After that, Bob became even harsher towards me, constantly nitpicking at the way I cleaned, the taste of my cooking, even the way I folded laundry. Every complaint was accompanied by a loud slap on the table or a rough placement of a cup, making me constantly jumpy and apologetic. But Jennifer would just watch Bob's tantrums with a puzzled expression, never seeming to be scared or crying. Bob looked at Jennifer as if she were something strange. Jennifer didn't speak much, but she learned to read quickly and was always engrossed in books. She could focus on her reading for hours. By the time she was in preschool, she was not just reading picture books, but also encyclopedias and children's books. I believe she understood quite a bit of complex words. When Jennifer was about to start elementary school, they suggested placing her in a special education class because of her lack of speech. When I talked to Bob about this, he was furious. "Are you kidding me? Why is my child in a special needs class?" Bob slammed his glass onto the table. I could only flinch and shrug. "You better fix this. I won't accept this kind of bad reputation," he said. Bob stormed off to the bedroom, his footsteps heavy on the floor. As I held my head in my hands, Jennifer gently patted my back with her tiny hands. "Thank you." I hugged Jennifer tightly as tears streamed down my face. "Jennifer, it's not your fault." The next day, Diane called. "Are you really going to let my granddaughter attend that kind of class? If the neighbors find out, I won't be able to walk outside from embarrassment. And it will all be your fault." Diane said what she wanted to say and hung up the phone. Neither Bob nor Diane seemed to genuinely care about Jennifer. It was all about how they were perceived by others. After consulting with local counselors, school teachers, and municipal officers, it was decided that Jennifer would attend regular classes instead of the special needs class. I felt that the students, parents, and teachers in the special needs class were all wonderful and thought it might be a better fit for Jennifer. But I couldn't even suggest it, seeing the evident objection from Bob and Diane. When Jennifer started elementary school and I had some free time, the temp agency I worked for offered me a permanent position. The job was fun and fulfilling. It felt good to be needed and relied upon, especially compared to the stifling atmosphere at home. I decided to discuss this with Bob. As expected, Bob was hesitant. "They offered me a permanent position at my current job. I really want to work full-time." Bob looked down at me with crossed arms. Make sure you take care of the house just like before, or even better. But I'm gonna need some help from you too. Bob turned away and banged the table. Housework is your job. Are you seriously asking me? After a brief pause, Bob smirked. Got it. I'll ask my mom. She can help with the house chores. I was shocked. I couldn't believe Diane, with whom I always had issues, was coming to our house. Would I be able to stand it? Eventually, Bob gave Diane his spare key, and she started dropping by our place every other day. Whenever Diane was at our house, she always makes sarcastic remarks. This place is a mess. Poor Bob has to live like this. How on earth were you raised to clean like this way? Because of Diane's frequent visits, I started being even more meticulous with my house chores. Yet, she would nitpick and complain about the smallest things. I put up with this bullying for weeks, but finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I told Diane that I was taking care of the house properly and that she didn't need to come over. Reluctantly, Diane agreed and stopped visiting. But just when I breathed a sigh of relief, Bob started spending more time at his parents' house. Bob had always loved his childhood home and would return there often, but the frequency of his visits increased. A little while later, when Jennifer was in second grade, my father-in-law, who had always been so full of life, suddenly passed away. My father-in-law was the only one who was ever kind to Jennifer. What struck me as odd at the funeral was seeing Bob and Diane occasionally glanced at each other and laughed. Weren't they sad? I never got the impression that Diane and my father-in-law were close though. Seeing the main mourner laughing at a funeral seemed out of place. With my father-in-law gone, Jennifer lost the only ally she had. I was filled with unease. Juggling housework, childcare, and a full-time job had worn me out, and I fell sick with a fever. While Bob was hanging out at his family home, I called him, asking if he could help with dinner, but he flatly refused. My mom never asked my dad to do anything, even when she was sick. I don't want to catch a cold from you. I'm gonna stay at my folks for a bit, Bob said and then hung up. Bob didn't come home for a whole week after that. As I started to feel better and work got busier, my promotion began to come up. I was offered a position as a section manager. I was thrilled, but considering my responsibilities at home, it felt like a heavy burden. I talked to Bob, but as expected, he insisted I keep up with the household duties. Moreover, Bob gave me a condescending look. Really, you think you can handle a position like section manager? That's the same rank as me, you know. Bob suddenly got up from his seat and headed to the bedroom. The next day, Diane came over to the house. Bob was complaining, you know. He said the house is a mess because you don't put effort into housework. Diane quickly entered the house and began inspecting everything. The way the windows were wiped, how the laundry was folded, the water stains in the bathroom, I was made to redo all of these tasks. Every time Diane came over and started nagging at me, Jennifer started talking to Diane. Jennifer approached Diane with a serious look on her face and asked, Granny, what do you think are the 4 main elements of happiness? Do you know what happiness hormones are? Taken aback by Jennifer's rapid-fire questions, Diane looked puzzled. It must have been a while since Diane had heard Jennifer's voice. You can talk normally, huh? Answer my question from earlier. Diane was probably clueless about the question. She tilted her head in confusion. Oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins. Diane looked more confused and glanced at me with a concerned expression. They're neurotransmitters, mainly secreted from the pituitary gland in the brain. Lately, Jennifer has been reading a lot of medical books. While taken aback, Diane listened to Jennifer's explanations. Jennifer continued to passionately talk about the connection between neurotransmitters and diseases, as well as substances that induce sleep. Diane, overwhelmed by Jennifer's focus, left the house exhausted. Thankfully, I was spared any nagging that day. On my birthday, Bob, returning from a business trip, brought a birthday cake. It was the first time he'd ever bought something for me since we got married. Even though he gave Diane souvenirs every time he went on a business trip and gifted her designer scarves, wallets, and bags on her birthday, he'd never bought anything for Jennifer and me. I was stunned, trying to figure out what got into Bob this time. Seeing me in shock, Bob held up the cake box and said, "Thanks for everything. I love you. I'm gonna put this in the fridge. Let's eat it later." Bob's overly sweet tone gave me goosebumps. Jennifer, seemingly displeased with something, took a bottle of mineral water from the fridge, gave the cake a quick glance, and went to her room. Jennifer stayed in her room, so Bob and I ate dinner first. Throughout the meal, Bob showered me with cringeworthy compliments. "You know, I always leave the housework up to you. I'm sorry about that. I'm gonna help out more from now on." "Thanks." Although I found his words uncomfortable, I just nodded along, not wanting to upset him. After dinner, as I was cleaning up, Bob took out the cake box from the fridge. I was about to set plates and get a knife when Bob gestured for me to sit. "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." Bob dished out the cake and brought it to the table. Honestly, I found his actions a bit creepy. "I got chocolate cake, Emily's favorite. You like chocolate, don't you?" I couldn't stand being with him alone any longer, so I decided to fetch Jennifer. "I'll go call Jennifer. Just wait here," I said and hurried to her room. Jennifer was on my old computer, seemingly searching for something. "Mom, you shouldn't eat that cake." "Why? What do you mean?" "Just trust me right now." Jennifer looked at me with a desperation I had never seen in her before. So, I decided to trust her. Jennifer took my hand and led me back to the dining room. "Shall we dig in?" "Hey, we don't have any forks." Usually, I'd head to the kitchen right away, but Jennifer was gripping my clothes tightly, preventing me from moving. "Oh, my bad. I'll get them," Bob said cheerfully, rising from the table. That's when Jennifer whispered urgently to me. "Mom, if you eat that, you're gonna die." Quickly, Jennifer switched mine and Bob's slices of cake. Bob, coming back with a fork, began eating the cake in front of us. "It's delicious, Emily. It's made by a famous pastry chef, you know." Hesitantly, I took a bite of the cake. Jennifer started eating hers too. As Bob proudly rambled about reserving the cake a month in advance and how the crushed nuts on top were delicious, he suddenly began to choke. Bob's face quickly turned red, his breathing grew labored, he started to foam at the mouth, and then he collapsed onto the floor. It looked like an anaphylactic shock from an allergy. Both Bob and I have buckwheat allergies, but there was no way the cake we were eating contained any. I froze in shock and confusion. Jennifer spoke to me with a calm voice. "Mom, call 911. Jennifer handed me her phone. Snapping back to reality, I called the ambulance. Jennifer turned Bob to his side and urged me to hit him hard on the back. Doing as instructed, Bob spit out the cake he had eaten. His breathing seemed a little easier after that. Bob was semi-conscious, murmuring buckwheat, buckwheat. Even in the ambulance, he kept mumbling the same, and an EMT told me to sit next to him for comfort. I did as I was told and sat beside Bob. After receiving treatment at the hospital, Bob was out of danger. For precaution, he was kept for a few days. I wondered how Jennifer knew something life-threatening was gonna happen. I returned home after completing the hospital admission procedures, all the while pondering the mystery. Jennifer showed me a wrapper she pulled out from the trash. "Look, Dad threw this in the kitchen trash." It was a wrapper from buckwheat cookies. Jennifer continued. "The cake box Dad brought home had a sticker half peeled off." Jennifer said she checked the kitchen trash and found an unfamiliar wrapper, so she looked it up online. She discovered that the cookies contained buckwheat flour and warned me about it. I still can't believe that the crushed nuts on the cake were actually crumbled buckwheat cookies. I recalled Jennifer's warning that she was like, "Mom, if you eat that, you're gonna die," and shuddered. If Jennifer hadn't been so quick-witted back then, it would have been me eating that cake right now. The thought of me lying in a hospital bed, taken by an ambulance, sent chills down my spine. Did Bob really tamper with the cake intending to take my life? I pulled out my phone, ready to make a call. I need to tell the police right away. I think you should reconsider. I jumped in surprise at Jennifer's voice. Why? Jennifer began to explain calmly. Dad's the one who collapsed. If you report it, the police might suspect you. A sense of dread clouded my vision. She was right. Going to the police might only make me a prime suspect. I felt an overwhelming sense of despair, wondering what to do. Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle it, Jennifer reassured. Jennifer went into Bob's study and began to search for something. Bob had always told me not to go in without permission, and I had rarely ever entered. Jennifer started rummaging through a drawer and flipping through a notebook. Dad's always been meticulous. He must have written something down. She stopped and showed me a page from the notebook. It was a revelation. My father-in-law had been a victim in a similar way. The note detailed how to mix crushed buckwheat cookies into seasoning. What was even more shocking was that Diane was involved in this sinister plan. They were conspiring together. At the bottom of the page, it read next Emily's birthday. I clenched the notebook tightly in my hands. It's okay, that's why. Jennifer said, her voice strained, trying to comfort me. At that moment, I realized I was shaking more from anger than fear. After what he did to my father-in-law, he was after my life. I made a vow deep within. I would never forgive Bob and Diane. With determination in my heart, I spoke to Jennifer. Hey, this notebook, it could be used as evidence, right? Jennifer shook her head sadly. I wish, but probably not. Jennifer continued. If they claim it's just a figment of their imagination, we've got nothing. And as for Grandpa, there's no way to prove anything now. I hung my head deep in thought. You're right. Without concrete evidence, they can weasel out of it. Jennifer gripped my hand tightly. I'll find the evidence. I promise I'm gonna protect you. We'll send those two to prison. Encouraged by Jennifer's words, I nodded with determination and squeezed her hand in return. If they want a fight, we'll give them one. For Jennifer, and for my own sake, I was resolved to protect my life and avenge my father-in-law. Jennifer and I swore to take revenge on Bob and Diane. We started preparing for our final confrontation. The first step was to lure them into our house. I asked Diane to tell me Bob's favorite dishes since I wanted to cook for him when he got out of the hospital. Without any suspicion, Diane came over. I didn't want to be with Diane for even a second, but I held my tongue and learned her recipes in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Jennifer went through Diane's purse and found the buckwheat cookies. Swiftly, Jennifer took just one of them. The next day, I brought the buckwheat cookie to work and requested a composition test. Who would have thought that working in a food inspecting company would come in handy at a time like this? A few days later, Bob was discharged from the hospital. I told Diane that I was preparing a special dinner for discharged and asked her to pick up Bob. While waiting for Bob to come home, Jennifer and I prepared a table filled with Bob's favorite dishes. By the time the dinner preparations were finished, Bob and Diane had returned home. Jennifer went to the front door to greet them. Holding Bob's bags, Jennifer guided them to the dining table. Mom and I made today's dishes, taught by Grandma. Bob, pleased, took his seat and began eating. Diane too seemed to enjoy her meal. After a while, puzzled expressions formed on their faces. Hey, Mom, look at that. Bob whispered to Diane, gesturing subtly. Oh my God. Diane exclaimed, staring at something on the table, her eyes widening in shock. So startled. She even dropped the fried chicken she was holding with her fork. And she didn't seem to notice. Bob and Diane stopped eating. Trying to lighten the mood, I asked Bob. Is the seasoning all right? I guess I can't make it quite like your mother did. They both heads down and were like, no, it's not that and it's delicious. I beamed a big smile at them. This seasoning isn't just tasty. It seems to be quite invigorating too. My father-in-law had told me about it a while ago, I mentioned. Bob and Diane began to shiver, as if cold. I continued to smile, unfazed. Jennifer, sprinkle some of this seasoning on their food. As Jennifer reached for the seasoning. Stop. Don't put that unknown stuff on it. He shook off Jennifer's hand with a fierce look. What's got you so spooked? I just wanted you and your mother to live a long life. I said with a broad grin. Just stop it, please. Diane covered her ears and screamed. Why? You wanted me to be healthy too, didn't you? That's why you sprinkled that stuff on the cake. In the end, you ate it yourself and ended up in the hospital. I handed a set of documents to the two of them, who looked utterly shocked. I had our company's inspector check the contents. What was on the cake and the buckwheat cookies had matching ingredients. Bob and Diane exchanged glances, confronted with the evidence. What are you talking about? I have no idea about any of that. The ingredients in the buckwheat cookies Diane had and the ones you threw away in our trash are from the same product. You think it's okay to just go through someone's stuff? Those cookies were a gift from a friend from their travels. Calmly, I placed a copy of Bob's notebook on the table. Then what's this note about ordering cookies online? The notebook detailed the manufacturer, product name, shipping date, price, and more. Bob and Diane's faces turned from red to blue. It also says here that in small amounts it wouldn't be detected if induced to vomit. I stared intently at Diane. This is related to my father-in-law's cause of death, isn't it? Bob, looking defeated, began to speak. Dad was in our way. Maybe he didn't like that Mom and I were close. He was always butting in and being a nuisance. He constantly lectured Bob and me, saying things like our relationship isn't normal. I couldn't stand it. We mixed those buckwheat cookies into the seasoning and made him eat it. It was merely concern for an unusually close mother-son relationship that had troubled my father-in-law. Yet, Bob and Diane seemed to have taken it personally. Their justifications were incredibly selfish. I couldn't help but pity my father-in-law, who lost his life trying to foster a better family environment. So, since it worked on my father-in-law, you tried the same method on me? That's right. You have the same buckwheat allergy as me and Dad. You were in our way too. My disbelief turned into sheer astonishment. What you two did is a crime. I'm gonna call the police right now and submit this evidence. Suddenly, Bob stood up, snatched the copied notebook from the table, crumpled it, and forced it into his mouth, swallowing it whole. Diane, Jennifer, and I watched in shock. There you go. No more evidence. The police will just think it's some crazy story from Emily, my wife. Bob looked down at Jennifer and me with a smug expression. Dad, that's a copy. The real one is somewhere else. Jennifer calmly stated. Then, she placed the voice recorder on the table. You can't deny it anymore, she said. From the beginning, Jennifer had secretly recorded their conversation with a voice recorder hidden under the table. Damn, it's over. Bob muttered, collapsing weakly into his chair. We were so close. Just a bit more and the obstacle would have been gone. Diane seemed unable to contain her anger, slamming the table with both hands. You guys really thought this plan would work, huh? Jennifer remarked with a hint of disbelief. Regardless of the plan, I'm gonna protect Mom no matter what. I chimed in as I pulled out my smartphone. I'm calling the police. Admit your wrongdoing and make amends. It's the least you can do to honor my father-in-law. As I began to dial, both Bob and Diane suddenly tried to apologize to me. Please, don't call the cops. We're really sorry, Bob begged. Yes, forgive us. They kept apologizing to me. Jennifer suddenly began to explain how their plan went wrong. Dad's a total mama's boy, so a perfect crime was never gonna work. Too many obvious mistakes. If it were me, I'd first. I quickly covered Jennifer's mouth. Jennifer, use that knowledge wisely, okay? My eyes locked to her. Jennifer nodded in agreement. Yeah, I got it. I won't get involved with people like this anymore. Also, I have something to inform Mom later. I hugged Jennifer tightly. Yeah, I got it. From now on, let's live peacefully together. When the police came to arrest Bob and Diane, they cried and screamed, making it difficult for the officers. The copied notes, the voice recording, and the purchase history of buckwheat cookies found on Bob's computer became evidence that led to their conviction, including the matter regarding my father-in-law. After the arrest, by the time Bob was charged, my divorce from him was finalized. We'd proceeded with the division of property between I and Bob. Diane ended up with selling her family home to cover lawyer costs. Bob, having no income to pay child support, used the money from the sale of his house for it. This left Bob and Diane with nowhere to go once they were released. I have set up a memorial for my father-in-law. I wanted to properly pay my respects. After the verdict for Bob and Diane was announced, Jennifer and I reported the incident at my father-in-law's gravesite. I'm sure he'd be pleased from up in heaven. After the incident, Jennifer showed me a piece of paper. This is what I said I'd tell you. It was an IQ test result. I was taken aback and had to double-check when I saw it. It says 135 here. My IQ is 135. I was genuinely surprised. I believe anything over 130 is considered gifted. I'm sorry, Mom. I took the test without telling you and even used your credit card without permission. I was once again surprised by what Jennifer could do. Later on, Jennifer transferred to a school that caters to gifted children. Jennifer, as usual, has difficulty communicating and doesn't talk to anyone, but she really likes the environment where no one minds and she can study whatever interests her, and she attends happily. Living with just Jennifer has been joyful, my work has been fulfilling, and life has been rewarding. Perhaps it's because I've been full of life and my complexion has improved, but I've been frequently told I look younger. Ever since we began living just the two of us, Jennifer started hugging me more often. When you do this, it releases a lot of the happy hormone oxytocin, she'd say. I'm still not exactly sure where oxytocin comes from, but it surely makes me feel happy. And to my delight, my menstrual cycle returned. Maybe it's thanks to this happy hormone Jennifer mentioned. From here on out, I'm gonna live with Jennifer, keeping our smiles bright.